waterways expert Ben Emanuel, Chris Manganiello, and Natalie White.
Thank you, Lizzie. Appreciate it. We're going to make it quick and painless. Because this is where we talk about politics and science and public policy. I think the artist panel is wonderful, and we're hitting on a lot of the same themes. The truth is that we could sit here and talk about these topics for quite a while. Because all of this is a wide topic, you know, people and water, essentially, that relationship. At least that's how I've been thinking about Deluge, this show. It's really much more than about flooding. It's really about our relationship as humans to water in particular, and to the environment that we live in. So it's been very good for me to think about all these topics that I spend all my time thinking about. Just by way of background, I work in grassroots advocacy based on watershed protection, clean water advocacy, river protection. So to come into the show, to be asked to write the essay for Deluge, which is on these topics that I spend all my waking hours thinking about, talking about, writing about, and to deal with them from other perspectives, to talk to the artists about the perspectives that they bring to the issues and topics has been really quite a treat for me. It's really been fun, frankly, to do that, and eye-opening in a lot of ways. So I want Chris to talk in just a minute here, but it's been interesting how timely, Catherine Taylor and I were just talking in a way about how timely this show has been because of the Atlanta floods last fall. And here in this region, we just lived through that severe drought. And then a year or two later, depending on when you count it from, this huge metropolis was flooded. We didn't have to worry about having enough water. So it's sort of difficult for us to sit here today and talk only about the floods. We've kind of got to talk about both sides of that coin because it all relates to the sustainability of our living with water, particularly here in this region, but really anywhere on the planet. Then meanwhile, this spring, while the show was up, Nashville, Tennessee had an experience very similar to Atlanta. For a lot of similar reasons when you assess and look at how and why all that happened in Nashville and how and why it all happened in Atlanta. So I think all that sadly works very well for us to be here talking about these issues today. And I just want to introduce this by way of saying that we're going to talk more broadly, I think, than just about floods. Is that enough of an introduction to the topic at hand? It might be wide-ranging, but I think it'll make more sense. So, as Lizzie said, my name is Ben Emanuel. I work for a nonprofit called Riverkeeper in the organization's Oconee River Project, focusing on the Oconee River, which is here in Athens. I also work for a statewide group called Georgia River Network. Chris has been spending a lot of time there, so we've been spending the last several months talking and blogging a lot about water policy issues in Georgia. Chris just finished his PhD at UGA in the Department of History, doing basically environmental history about the development of dams and water management in the Savannah River Basin on the Georgia-South Carolina border. And Natalie White works for Athens Park County in the Stormwater Division, which, if you don't know, is really a wonderful and progressive wing of our local government here in Athens when it comes to environmental awareness and environmental management. I say awareness because Natalie's job is the education component of it. And if you haven't caught any of her programs like making rain barrels or doing neighborhood workshops, it's really wonderful to have folks in our local government treating these issues this way. So we're going to talk kind of big picture and then come into some local things. As Lizzie said, the proactive, positive things we can all do. So it's not all doom and gloom when we don't live here. Flooding the place with our tears and depression of what we've done to the planet. Take it away, please.
All right, great. Thanks, Ben. And to Lizzie, both Ben and Lizzie for putting together the panel. I also had a chance to walk through the other day with both Ben and Natalie. And so in some ways, what follows for me is in some ways inspired by that walk and talk in this great space and this wonderful artwork. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about natural disasters and environmental conditions. Deluge helps viewers interpret a set of environmental conditions that culminated with what we have come to regard as a natural disaster. Floods like tornadoes, hurricanes are easily recognized natural disasters, particularly since, as folks have been saying, these events are so super photogenic. High water, manufactured homes and ruins, and presidents and windbreakers and jeans make for great copy. I grew up thinking that flooding only generally happened along the Mississippi and the Red Rivers, where the victims were Midwestern farmers and small rural towns, again, mostly kind of agricultural landscape. As for hurricanes, those tended to hit remote Caribbean nations, resort towns, and perhaps the Everglades. I like the image, as contributors have shifted the focus. The exhibit makes flooding a metropolitan and a suburban environmental affair. In the past few years, my thinking about natural disasters has changed in two important ways. First, there's nothing natural, as people have been saying, there's nothing natural about a natural disaster, except perhaps for parts of the nature. Or put another way, the only thing natural about Atlanta's record flooding in 2009 was the hydrologic cycle of the Gravity. The flooding was considered a disaster because, again, as people have been talking about, a lot of water harmed the built environment. People, property, and their futures were flooded because of a series of continuous decisions above the stream banks that radically altered the hydrologic cycle and the way water moved across the land. I have to credit environmental historian Ted Steinberg for influencing my thinking about terms like natural disaster and act of God. According to Steinberg, when we call climatic events natural disasters, we do so to justify a set of responses that has proved both environmentally unsound and socially, if not morally, bankrupt. When we call a disaster natural, it enables us to, in part, absolve ourselves of moral responsibility. Because we consider the disaster natural, we don't have to take responsibility for explosive suburban growth, impervious four-lane highways, inadequate stormwater systems, or selling floodplain homes to unsuspecting buyers. If you need some local examples, read about Atlanta's flooding. So, how do we try to manage flooding? Well, we attempt to manage the risk of flooding with levees or other structural solutions. And again, I'm not talking in the big picture here. But in reality, these structures, these flood control solutions, only manufacture and produce future risk. Expensive flood control solutions can simplify and amplify this future risk. Again, if you need another example of these technological and social failures related to flood control, we need to speak about the failed levees in New Orleans and the predominantly American and poor residents who bore the brunt of that failure. So rather than talking about natural disasters, I think we should be talking about environmental conditions and justice. In Atlanta, affluent Buckhead flooded, but so did Cobb and Gwinnett County trailer parks. We should talk about climatic cycles, geography, and topography. And when we talk about ecology, we need to include humans with all the other non-human living and inert stuff. We need to understand the political, economic, and social implications of environmental tinkering. Doing so will enable us to think about the human contributions to environmental disasters and avoid future consequences. The second thing that influenced my thinking about natural disasters is directly related to Deluge. I like cycles in the big picture, and so my personal research has been talked about in some ways is focused more on the world of drought. Droughts don't move as fast as low-pressure systems do across Doppler radar screens, but they can do as much damage. What image comes to mind when I actually say drought? You know, today maybe the red clay rain-ground Blue Lake Lanier for folks who live in Georgia, that might come to mind. But if I had actually thought about the question 5 years ago, I would have probably thought about farmers standing next to wilting crops with dusty dirt slipping through their weathered hands. Like Deluge, I've interpreted drought as a metropolitan suburban environmental problem. Now when I think about drought, I think about swimming pools in gated communities, suburban lawns, urban agricultural lobby, gallons per flush of toilets, conservation pricing, watering schedules, and perhaps that trash can that sits in my shower. As the Southeast recovers from the worst drought ever recorded, we should pause and remember that urban drought is not new to the Southeast in particular. Major droughts in the 1920s, 1940s, and 1950s influenced risk management and risk production. In the 1920s, energy companies like the Georgia Power Company relied primarily on hydroelectric dams and reservoirs to generate electricity for Atlanta and other communities across the Southeast. White coal, as energy executives called it at the time, was reliable and a renewable energy. But the 1920s drought, which was the worst on record at the time, made renewable energy not so reliable and exposed the companies in growing southern cities